Welcome to CFRI's Cystic Fibrosis Community Voices, a video podcast series created by and for the cystic fibrosis community.
Once again, I'm Russell Wise. I'm the pediatric CF pharmacist at Stanford, and I'm here tonight to talk a little bit about one of the hot topics in cystic fibrosis, and that's the use of different herbs and oils. And my goal tonight is to kind of give you a little bit deeper dive on how to evaluate some of these products. I can't go through every single one of them, but this should give you a little idea of what we look at as those of us in the healthcare side of things. So first of all, I have no financial disclosures to make, and once again, this is not intended to promote or discourage the use of specific products on the market. I just want to give you a little bit deeper understanding of how to evaluate that. So every 5 years, the NIH does a national survey in the US for adults and pediatrics, and they look at these different complementary healthcare approaches. The studies are pretty similar among children and adult, but they look at, they ask questions like who utilizes meditation, who utilizes yoga, how many people are utilizing herbal supplements. And as you can see from this result back in 2012, I apologize, the 2017 information hasn't been put into nice graphs like this, but in 2012 we see that natural products are probably the most utilized form of complementary health among children. And then if we look at the adult data a little bit deeper at the specific herbal supplements, we see that fish oil by far is the most utilized supplement out there. And I also want to note here you see that increase over the years of other products like melatonin and probiotics. I would expect that these trends have pretty much continued into today's. So the first product that I want to talk about tonight is the Endrepta-C. Endrepta-C is a formulation of natural ingredients that's been reported to help improve lung function by improving the CFTR function. I will note that there are 3 different products of Endrepta. There's the A, B, and C formulation, and this C formulation is specifically marketed to cystic fibrosis. It costs around $50 a bottle, and the dose is 3 capsules 3 times a day. So one of these bottles is expected to last about 1 month. We know that patients with cystic fibrosis are already on a ton of medications, and so one of our big concerns with this is just adding another supplement on 3 times a day, 3 capsules each dose, might prove to be a little difficult for some patients. But let's look a little bit more at the specific the specific ingredients in here that are marketed for cystic fibrosis. And those are the turmeric and the curcumin component of that, boswellia, as well as eshin. So curcumin is it's a component of turmeric. You might hear turmeric when you're doing stuff like cooking. Curcumin is what gives turmeric the orange glow to it. It's got uses as an anti-inflammatory, as an antioxidant. It's been promoted to improve bone and joint health, and even as an antimicrobial. So the specific claim that's cited by the company that promotes Endrepta is that this W1282X mutation can be activated by curcumin. And so what I did is I took this reference from the company and really looked at what study that they're referring to. And so I want to talk a little bit more about that. So the W1282X, as many of you probably know, is one of the nonsense mutations, meaning that it's not one of those mutations that's eligible for a modulator because of the way the mutation knocks out the CFTR function. In this specific study, it was an in vitro study, meaning it was in the lab. This was not in human subjects. They looked at the addition of ivacaftor and curcumin, and they were able to demonstrate enhanced CFTR channel activity. It was specifically noted at the end of this study that this does not translate to in vivo or in human, where the amount of the polypeptide for producing the CFTR channel is already limited. This also brings up another interesting question about curcumin and its use in cystic fibrosis. Can effective doses of curcumin be achieved? We already know that it has very poor bioavailability or very poor absorption through the gut. And so it's very important to keep that in mind if you're looking at products that contain curcumin. And finally, drug interactions. So for the amount that actually does get absorbed systemically, we do have concerns about the interactions with the other medications that are also metabolized through the liver pathways, specifically this 3A4 pathway, because there's many medications in cystic fibrosis that we use that are also metabolized through these pathways. That includes our modulators, our azole antifungals, as well as some antibiotics. Next, I'm going to move on to boswellia. It's maybe more commonly known as frankincense. And it also has uses as an anti-inflammatory, anti-diabetic, antimicrobial, and even some dermatologic ailments. Specifically, the company that markets Injepta for cystic fibrosis they're really honing in on this claim of it being an anti-inflammatory and anti-asthma supplement. So the reference here was a double-blind, placebo-controlled 6-week clinical study, and which is great, which is the type of studies that we like to see when evaluating supplements. However, I do note that this was done over 20 years ago and was only published as an abstract. The full study wasn't actually made available. But what they found was that leukotriene biosynthesis was inhibited at a dose of 300 milligrams 3 times a day. There are only about 80 patients in this study, and what I also found very interesting was that over a quarter of patients responded to the supplement, even though they were just being given placebo. The other interesting note is that Injepta only contains 500 milligrams a day, so it's really not even up to the same amount that this study was including. And next, the final component of the Injepta that I want to highlight is this eshen, also known as horse chestnut. It's used as an anti-inflammatory agent and may have some vasoprotective properties. And the claim here is that it can suppress nonsense mutations promoting read-through of full-length CFTR. And so if I take you back to that W1282X mutation, that nonsense mutation, this is really the type of supplement that you would be aiming for. It would be read-through of full-length CFTR. And this study down here, which was published in a pretty reputable journal fairly recently, discusses how they showed this. But what I want to let you know on this is this was also only an in vitro study. This has not been done in humans. And the authors specifically note that this may be an opportunity to further study in humans, but we just don't have that information yet. And then less than a year after publishing this specific study in 2016, we all of a sudden have a product that's directly marketed to our cystic fibrosis patients, making this claim. So just keep in mind that this is all basically in vitro data that we are looking at. So finally, next I want to move on to eucalyptus oil. I'm going to talk initially about the doTERRA Breathe essential oils. I get a lot of patients in clinic who talk about the different essential oils that they're using, and so I highlighted this one just because it's a specific respiratory blend, so it's pretty all-encompassing, I would think, of a lot of what our CF patients are looking at, and you see all these different essential oils that are included in their blend. Typically, it's administered using a diffuser. Some patients apply this topically. It runs about $30 for a small 15 ml vial. May have some skin sensitivity associated with it, and the claim is that it gives you feelings of clear airways and easy breathing. So they're not specifically making claims for its use in cystic fibrosis, but we do see where it might have a place in therapy for some patients. But I want to look a little bit more in depth at the eucalyptus side of it, just because there is so much more information out there about people looking at eucalyptus and its potential therapeutic benefits. So like I said, eucalyptus has been widely studied. It's been looked at as being an antimicrobial. Does it have anti-inflammatory properties? It may function as a mucolytic or a bronchodilator. So we can really see why people in cystic fibrosis are very interested in this type of supplement. In 2010, there was a review article published. So they looked at a bunch of different studies out there that people have published regarding eucalyptus. And what they noted was that there was no formal correlation between the amount of the major constituents and its antibacterial properties. So I'll highlight here, I pulled one of the charts from this study, and let's look at the Staph aureus, the Steno, and the Pseudomonas, which are really the bugs that we're focused with in cystic fibrosis. And you'll see that the evidence just doesn't really correlate, or the sensitivity of all these studies, it's kind of all over the board as to whether or not it would be effective as an antimicrobial agent. And also worth noting, when a lot of these studies on these herbal supplements and essential oils are looking at their antimicrobial properties of the specific agent, I've noticed that a lot of the concentrations are different than what we would typically use in a standard lab to evaluate antibiotics as far as resistance and susceptibilities to specific organisms. Recently in 2018, there was there's another review article published, and they did note one of those studies in there as eucalyptus having use in relieving coughing, expelling mucus, and relaxing some of the respiratory muscles. If it's absorbed systemically, it may have interactions with some of our same liver enzyme pathways that metabolize some of our cystic fibrosis meds. So this is similar to one of the products I talked about earlier. And I do want to caution that if you are interested in or considering taking this by mouth, it does have rapid GI absorption. So you really have to pay attention to what concentration the product is and what type of dose that they are recommending, because there have been deaths reported out there from toxicity related to eucalyptus. And finally, with essential oils, I wanted to bring up the idea of it using a diffuser. So, in cystic fibrosis, we have a lot of focus around like our nebulizer cups and machines being sterilized between uses, and even some of the products that we run through those being as sterile as possible before they're entered into the lungs. These diffuser machines, I just gave 3 different pictures here to give examples of some of the products that are out there, but these would be, as far as sterilization goes, quite complex on how could you clean one of these machines. And I'm afraid I don't have any specific recommendations on how to do that. With essential oils, you also have to be very concerned about the purity of the substance that's being diffused. I'm going to talk a little bit later about the FDA regulation with herbal supplements, and you'll kind of see what I'm meaning as far as the purity and manufacturing practice of these products. And then finally, what type of dose is needed to actually achieve some of these properties that are being promoted for use, such as the antimicrobial properties. I have yet to come across a study that's really recommended a specific dose of eucalyptus to show these type of properties. So next I'm going to move on to fish oil. So this is a kind of a complicated chart, but what I want to go through with you is to point out the 2 different essential fatty acid pathways. So omega-3 and omega-6. And when I talk about essential fatty acids, I mean they're not naturally produced by the body. They have to come from your diet. And so the most common pathway is this, or the one we see most in the standard American diet or Western diet, is this omega-6. Just from the sources, you have canola, corn, wheat germ in there. So those are big sources of omega-6. And this is increasing the arachidonic acid, which is related to our pro-inflammatory cytokines in the body. Whereas on the omega-3 side, some of the purest forms of omega-3 are the cold water fish, salmon, and tuna, which provide us with this EPA and DHA, and thus are more of our anti-inflammatory pathways. So fish oil as a whole, there have been so many studies out there for so many different indications. It's used in as an antidepressant, cardiovascular disease, osteoporosis, and rheumatoid arthritis. And even in cystic fibrosis, we have a Cochrane review. So when I refer to this as a Cochrane review and a meta-analysis, I'm really talking about some of the highest quality evidence that we have out there. And specifically from this Cochrane review in cystic fibrosis, they looked at 4 different clinical trials, and they were able to say that there may be benefit with minimal side effects on using fish oil supplementation in CF. However, they did note that a large long-term study is still needed to determine what type of therapeutic benefit that it could have. I also wanted to briefly put in there something about the asthma diet study, just because this is in the process of being published, if it's not published already, but some very recent news, and you might see this on the news or hear other people talk about it. But they looked at children who were already had pretty high levels of omega-6 in their diet from the consumption of heavily processed foods, and they were able to demonstrate that diet modifications to add more omega-3 to the diet and remove some of the omega-6 decrease some of the severity of asthma symptoms in these patients. So with fish oil supplementation, you want to consider the omega-3 versus omega-6. Omega-6 is going to be in your diet as part of an essential fatty acid pathway. So what you're really looking to supplement is that omega-3 part. You want its anti-inflammatory effects. There's an ongoing debate about the amount of EPA and DHA in these products. And there's been some recommendations that you want about a 4-to-1 ratio. However, I would expect over the next few years we'll see even more information come out about this ratio of EPA and DHA that's in the omega-3 for recommendations. Side effects with fish oil is really minimal, and interactions as far as drug-drug interactions go is not with really any of our typical CF medications. And I also put a resource in there if you're interested in a more in-depth review of omega-3 supplementation. The NIH has a great website that can walk you through a little bit more of that. So finally, I want to discuss a little bit about the role of the FDA and some of these dietary supplements and essential oils. Through the FDA process, drugs that are approved for use with indications as well as over-the-counter drugs are put through a pretty strenuous process of clinical trials for years and years of data. We have, as healthcare providers, we have so much information as far as effectiveness and side effects that we can relay to our patients. When it comes to dietary supplements, you'll notice that a lot of the things I reviewed tonight were mostly in this preclinical trial stage. They hadn't even been tested in humans yet. And the ones that have been studied in humans, they're really only about the size of these phase 1 trials. So we're very limited as far as the information we have as far as our recommendations for certain products. The FDA does not have to review a dietary supplement for safety or effectiveness before it's marketed. However, after marketing, they can remove a product if it's found to be unsafe. They leave it on the manufacturers to be responsible to promoting good manufacturing practice, meaning that the manufacturers are not putting impurities in their products and that it's labeled accurately. I highlighted here USP. So USP and National Formulary, they're responsible for establishing quality standards for all drug products that are brought to market in the United States. And this includes prescription and over-the-counter. There's a voluntary submission side for dietary supplements, and they can get tested for their quality, potency, purity, performance, consistency, as well as good manufacturing practice. And you can find a list of these products on the USP website. Another great resource that I love when trying to evaluate natural products is this natural medicines database. It really is a kind of a comprehensive database of the effectiveness of these products, safety, drug drug interactions, drug-food interactions. And then we actually have free access, everyone does, through, if you go onto the Kaiser website, you can find a link to natural medicines through that, and there's a consumer access version. So it's very useful when trying to evaluate the use of these supplements. And then one more point, I know I mentioned USP as far as one of the quality control options. There are some other independent organizations like NSF and Consumer Lab that also test products. So just about a month or two ago, the FDA released a statement that they're going to start having a tougher oversight on the supplement industry. It's responsible for almost $50 billion in sales in the United States, and it's also responsible for a very high number of emergency room visits from adverse effects related to the dietary supplement. And then increasingly, officials and public health experts are becoming concerned about unsafe ingredients. So you might have an actual active drug ingredient coming in from overseas and showing up in these supplements. So something you want to keep in mind when you're evaluating a dietary supplement. So some red flags. So be on the alert for big promises. Like if something's out there making a miracle cure, scientific breakthrough, secret ingredient, it's probably not going to be factual. Be careful about pseudomedical jargon such as purify, detoxify, energize. Like these are not outcomes of studies that we look at as far as safety, efficacy, and the science behind any of the clinical trials. So they're really kind of covering up the lack of proof of scientific evidence. Be careful about cure-alls. Maybe this product claims to treat a wide range of conditions. Testimonials. Just because somebody writes a review about how great a product is, it's not really the substitute for actual scientific proof. And then guarantees and limited offers. So people trying to get you to buy a supplement quickly without you actually having the time to really evaluate. And finally, if you want like a systematic way to kind of think about, should I use a supplement or should I not, really look at safety and the effectiveness of it. So is it safe? Is it effective? Yeah, I recommend using that. Is it safe? But do we not really know how effective it is, or is it not that effective, but I really want to give it a try? Well, can you tolerate the product? Is it giving you upset stomach? Is it giving you a headache? Are you missing half the doses because you need to take it 3, 4, 5 times a day? So really give that type of evaluation to it, and then you can take a look at the rest there. But and that's all I have.